Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Anyone tuning in today to watch the third programme with Andrew Johnson about Mars, we've put that show back a few weeks just to put out some new material about King Arthur. Many councils around the country are slashing their budgets due to the so-called recession. I prefer to call it a theft, but that's another subject. As part of cost-saving exercises, it has been reported recently that a small island in the Bristol Channel known as Flatholme may be sold off by Cardiff City Council. The island is currently part of St Mary's Parish, which is a church in Cardiff. Flatholme attracts about 2,000 visitors a year, but runs at a loss, and its disposal would save the council about £150,000 according to the budget papers. Why am I mentioning all this? I am mentioning it because South Wales has assets of huge historical importance that its current leaders do not seem to be aware of. One of these is the grave of the legendary King Arthur, and lies in a ruined church on Fortress Mountain, a few miles northeast of Bridgend. If this site was made into a tourist attraction, this would create global interest, not to mention thousands of jobs, and people would come from all corners of the globe to see it. There would then be no need to sell Flatholme. But don't take my word for this, listen to the experts in today's programme. I'm reporting today on a fresh, new insight into historical research which places the legendary King Arthur in Wales. I'll be speaking to two researchers who have comprehensively researched evidence pointing to the existence, date and location of King Arthur I and King Arthur II. I've interviewed Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett in the past for several TV programmes and covered some of their work tracing the King Arthurs. Today I have returned specifically to document the evidence which proves the existence, date and location of the King Arthurs. We're also going to screen some supporting testimony of 6 well-known professionals in this field.
Britain has some very strange problems in that we have a massive history, very well documented and recorded, and yet which is attacked, in other words, and generally regarded as a huge forgery.
The paradox with British history is there seems to be a preconceived mindset within an inaccurate framework. In other words, basically, the correct synthesis is not actually relevant to the actual tangible evidence which we've accumulated.
Particularly as they relate sites which are traceable, battlefields which are traceable, and all sorts of other buildings and ruins which are again traceable.
Misguided political reasons, because we have Arthur I in Warwickshire, England, and Arthur II in South Wales. So basically, rather than create a situation where people can benefit from it, they just basically try to rub it out completely.
If we look at it, we've got 1 or 2 salient points that have been attacked. One, we have an ancient British alphabet. Now this was roundly attacked as being forged and fabricated in 1800. So in 1776, he's recalling an inscription on an ancient stone naming a king who lived around the year 200 AD, a memorial stone, and yet its alphabet is not forged until 1800. So there's something wrong. This is what set us off to think, hey, there's something seriously wrong here. And we then searched and we found that all sorts of people had written and produced documents.
Up until this date, historical professionals haven't spoken at length about King Arthur being in Wales. So just tell us about the people who are going to speak in the programme today.
Well, the paradox at long last has emerged that we've got 6 experts. I mean, probably 3 professors and other experts, historians of at least 30 years standing, who actually agree emphatically that King Arthur II is from South Wales.
Then we found Julius Caesar had described the alphabet. Now, hang about, this is getting a bit much. So we realized there was something very seriously wrong. So it was the discovery of this alleged forgery of the alphabet, which is not a forgery, that really gave the real act, like the atom bomb in Hiroshima. It blew everything apart. That there's something seriously wrong. Then we've got things like the Ancient Bards of Britain. Again, a much abused volume, but in it, and this is an old book, is the same ancient alphabet.
What date is that book?
This one, 1906, I think. This is one of the later ones. There's one of 1848 here. 1906, that one. This, quoting ancient texts, this is 1848 ancient alphabet. And this guy is, again, a scholar, quoting ancient records. Now, why they've got away with this allegation that was only made around 1936?
Well, these historical professionals, sadly, have come quite a bit late, but it's self-explanatory what they say.
Okay, well, let's take a look at it.
In the scintilla of history that remains to us, a name appeared, and the name was Arthur. In the Nennius Miscellany in the Ashmolean Museum, there are many things said about this hero figure. Only once had this hero figure been mentioned before, but that was unfortunately for everybody in Welsh. In the poem The Gododdin, in which the beautiful phrase, sinister, chilling phrase of Gochorau brain di ar vir caer nibo evarthir. The ravens of the castle walls were glutted, though he was not Arthur. The first existence of the name in the 6th century poem. This identifies the time, the place, and the potential hero.
Well, I'm surprised that there isn't a lot more support for developing the Arthurian legends in relation to Wales from the main quangos, essentially, that are out there, because it really is in our interest to raise the profile, because even if the geography is contracted, it is still related to the Welsh nation and its heritage. And that, I think, is the key. Arthur is part of our heritage.
There is so much evidence for placing him in southeast Wales. It really is amazing that this idea hasn't been accepted.
Well, I've never had any doubts that Arthur was a Welshman. I mean, in those days, yes, we would have said ancient Britons or Celts, but no doubts at all. And his power base would have been in what we call today Monmouth, by the Severn there. And, that's where the legend grew and that's where the legend developed. And when we celebrate that fact, certainly with people from abroad, you have to mention, of course, the Glastonbury and all the lies and the frauds that went on there when they hijacked Wales. What's good now is, if you like, that the Welsh people are claiming Arthur back to Wales and for Wales. And I think that's very important at this time in our history.
I've been working in this part of the world in tourism for over 20 years. And when I first arrived, there were some voices telling me, Arthur's the big story here. And I was surprised, I suppose, that with all the claims the region had, why people weren't making more of it. And I think it's a combination of things. There's, I guess, a kind of organisational inertia to some extent, that everybody knew that Arthur came from South East Wales. There was no disputing it as far as, if you like, the folk memory was concerned. But it was just one of those things. It was just yet another story from Wales. And there were plenty of other things, and there were plenty of physical evidence of other things that were being exploited at the time. So I think it was probably a combination of events. And I suppose to some extent people felt maybe we'd missed the boat. When it was raised, people would say, oh yes, but Tintagel's got the story, or Winchester's got the story, or Glastonbury's got the story. What can we add? Forgetting, of course, that perhaps this is where the original story actually was.
We are not being allowed to conform to the normal standards applied to any other nation or tribe on the face of planet Earth in the presentation of our history. It's unreasonable to expect that everything about our history should always be recorded contemporaneously. There is enough contemporaneous record in the stones and what the stones tell us about the people and what they say. Of course, they've taken the stones, and thanks to a surveyor in Yorkshire, Mr. Collingwood, they have misdated them and are busy redating them by 500 and 600 years. That doesn't happen anywhere else. And this application of a double standard that no British record can be believed unless a Roman wrote the same record, or a Greek wrote the same record, or somebody else wrote the same record. That is being applied, and it's clearly, it's something like a Gestapo trial. You will be arrested, given a fair trial, found guilty, and shot. And that's really what they're doing to us. It doesn't matter what you've got. We know that given these unfair rules which are applied to this history, the British ancient history, and no other history, you can't win.
And there's a very good story out there which hasn't been told very effectively from the Welsh angle. And I think if we could tell that story effectively from the Welsh angle, we'd have a lot of people now living in America, now living in Australia, parts really, I suppose, of the old empire and the Welsh diaspora who would be very interested in visiting Wales, perhaps coming over to Wales for different reasons, but thinking, well, or coming over to the UK for different reasons, but thinking, oh, this would be a good opportunity to visit Wales, to check out some of these very interesting Arthurian legends. And we need desperately to tell those stories.
If you put him in the right time period and in the right location, the area of his true realm, you can then really get to grips with the problem. Now, Arthurus ap Meirig also bore the name Arthmile, and this is not unusual. Characters of that period, they often had several names. And what is really fascinating is that the name Arthmile appears on 2 or 3 Dark Age inscribed stones that can be found in the Vale of Glamorgan.
He has been accepted in all sorts of cultures. He's been deracinated, that is, made without roots. He's been denationalized, detribalized, and he becomes a world icon. And people will do with him what they wish. So he's part of the cultural icon in German literature, French literature. He appears in Spanish and Italian literature, and he appears fundamentally in the core of the lineage literature of royalty. Our Arthur now becomes the source by which the kings of England claim their right to rule. But all the time, if you read about him in both the, what I call the reality, the actuality, the 5th century, the 6th, the 7th and the 9th century, and you see him in the new fictitious romantic, practically pre-Hollywood, but made to the mark, the Arthur figure, which you make of him what you will, you give him what nationality you wish, and give him what accent you wish, what class you wish. But we, the Welsh who created him, have been denied him by the fact that he's so valuable as an icon, an attractive popular figure, a figure for touristic usage, that the world has him. And all I wish is that we claim him back. We go back into the literature, the early Welsh literature, identify him for what he is, and go into the early Latin literature, and then, of course, go into Geoffrey of Monmouth, who gave him the mark, having translated earlier books, of course, mark of the Arthur we know, which is part of the romantic history of the world.
We'll find there's a very interesting reference to him in the Brutes of England. And you've got to remember that up until modern times, this would have been generally firmly believed as authentic history. So in chapter 79, it's telling how King Arthur is over in France, Brittany area. And it's on about the Easter time. And it says, "And when King Arthur had thus his knights feasted at April after next sowing being springtime, he came again into Britain, his own land. And after at Whitsuntide next sowing, By counsel of his barons, he would be crowned King of Glamorgan. So everybody in Britain, certainly England and Wales, would have been in no doubt whatsoever, from the roots of England, that King Arthur II, at least, was a king of Glamorgan and Gwent, certainly king of Glamorgan. There can be no doubt about this. It's a very clear statement.
In South Wales, we're really missing out from the tourism point of view, because the story of King Arthur really belongs to this area. It's been snatched, it's been taken and planted in the West Country, where of course you have wonderful places like Tintagel Castle and Glastonbury Abbey, where the supposed grave of King Arthur was discovered in 1191. But really it was just a publicity stunt by the monks who were trying to raise money to help rebuild their abbey, which had burnt down a few years previously. So we really want King Arthur in this area to help our tourism industry.
If I had the money, I would commission an Arthur window to be in one of our great churches tomorrow, because we need that, and the whole. I mean, I was brought up on the fact that Llanilltyd, Llangadog, that all these saints were the original knights of the Round Table. And when you read even the early research, it makes sense, because where does it locate Arthur? Black Mountains to Monmouth. That's part of Wales. So for me, these were native princes who became Christians, but were still knights, if you like, in the modern sense, yes, of the Holy Grail. They were drawn together by this Arthur figure, and educated the same in Brittany, St. Samson. So, yes, we need places, not just churches, because it's a big, not just a big part of us, but we need to nourish our young people with this myth, with this legend. It's a real, I mean, I look at it from a Jungian point of view as well, that we have to make that connection, because it is important.